Just as you say, I'm simply a run-of-the-mill old man from the countryside, miserably.
All right then, please begin.
I can't let hallucinating if what I've been doing all these years turns out to be completely useless. I will protect. What trick? What?
Headlights is overtaking.
It's just a matter of time.
Divert the direction of that power.
You all right?
We're just getting started.
Antic.
Expected you're incredibly strong.
Hilt of the belly of the sword and knock.
Beryl Gardnett, a middle-aged swordsman, ran a dojo in a remote location, living a quiet and peaceful life. One day, during a training session, his father, Mordia Gardnett, approached him and mentioned how much he wished for a grandchild to care for. Even though 20 years had passed since Beryl took over as the dojo's instructor, he remained as physically weak as ever. Beryl explained that his focus had always been on managing the family dojo, leaving him no time to consider starting a family. The dojo had been passed down through generations in Beryl's family, and ever since he inherited it from his father, he had devoted himself entirely to being an instructor. In the past, he had aspired to achieve great feats, such as earning the title of a renowned swordsman, but although his skills far surpassed those of the average swordsman, he felt it wasn't enough to attain such a prestigious title. Nevertheless, he considered himself a competent teacher, as many of his students had gone on to become skilled swordsmen after graduating. After finishing that day's training, Beryl returned home to have a meal with his parents. However, his father continued to pressure him to get married and settle down. To strengthen his argument, Mordia asked his wife, Friend Gardnett, to persuade Beryl to find a wife, but Friend simply replied that such matters couldn't be forced and there was no reason to pressure Beryl. Still, Friend made it clear that she looked forward to the day she could hold a grandchild. Beryl nearly choked upon hearing that comment, especially since he didn't even have a lover. A short while later, there was a knock at the door. When Beryl opened it, he was greeted by a beautiful young woman. She addressed him as master, and upon taking a closer look, Beryl recognized her as Alucia Citrus, one of his former students. Inviting her inside, Beryl prepared a cup of tea so they could talk. Beryl remembered Alucia as an exceptionally talented student during her training days, but he never expected her to become the commander of the Royal Knight Order. Curious, Beryl asked what brought her here. Alucia explained that, as the Knight Commander, one of her duties was overseeing the training of new recruits, and she had taken the initiative to recommend Beryl as a special sword instructor. In fact, she had already obtained official approval through an imperial decree, which was why she had come to deliver the news in person. Beryl had never sought such a position, and the thought of refusing crossed his mind until his father interrupted, warning that opposing an imperial order wasn't just a simple refusal, it was an act of treason punishable by death. Alucia assured Beryl that rejecting the offer wouldn't get him executed, but he might face serious consequences if he refused, so it was better to accept it. Alucia had already prepared a carriage to take them to the capital, ready to depart immediately, and would explain the details of his new position tomorrow. Beryl couldn't believe Alucia expected him to leave just like that, but his father was fully supportive of the idea. Mordia wished him luck and told him to find a wife in the capital, even suggesting Alucia as a perfect candidate. Beryl asked his father to stop because it was making Alucia uncomfortable. The age difference between him and Alucia was too great for them to be a couple, but Alucia muttered softly that she actually didn't mind. Regardless, Beryl didn't want to find out what those serious consequences were, so he agreed to the offer and decided to leave for the capital with Alucia. Inside the carriage, Beryl noticed that Alucia was still using the sword he had given her long ago. This sword was presented by Beryl to every student who graduated from his dojo, and ever since receiving it, Alucia had taken great care of it. Beryl felt happy seeing how much Alucia valued his gift, but he thought the sword was unworthy of someone with the rank of Knight Commander. He mentioned that Alucia could easily obtain a better sword from any blacksmith, but Alucia insisted that this sword was the best for her. Beryl suspected Alucia was so attached to the sword because, as her former teacher, she still considered anything from him to be of higher quality. However, he was just an ordinary swordsman, not an extraordinary instructor. Then, Alucia said she was glad the reclusive swordsman was finally heading to the capital. Beryl was confused about who she meant, as he was clearly not a master swordsman, but Alucia explained that Beryl was quite famous in the swordsmanship world. He had taught dozens of students who went on to become adventurers and legendary swordsmen, making him something of a living legend, though he disliked the title. Beryl found the story amusing, but he was sure only Alucia truly saw him as a master swordsman. Soon after, they arrived at the royal capital, and Alusha left Beryl at an inn so he could rest, telling him she would pick him up the next morning. The following day, Alusha escorted Beryl to the castle and introduced him to the Knight Order. She told the recruits that Beryl was so strong that even she wouldn't be able to defeat him, emphasizing how fortunate they were to have an instructor of Beryl's caliber. However, not all knights were convinced Beryl deserved such a prestigious role, and one of them was particularly displeased with the situation. Shortly after, Beryl and Alusha were talking in the hallway, and Alusha congratulated him on his new role as a special instructor. She explained that Beryl only needed to visit the castle 3 or 4 times a month to train the recruits, so it wouldn't interfere much with his teaching schedule at the dojo. Suddenly, a girl ran up to Beryl, almost bursting with excitement at seeing her teacher again. Her name was Kirani Cruisil, a former student of Beryl's from 2 years ago. Beryl remembered that Kirani's goal was to become part of the Knight Order, so he was happy to see she had made it there, though she was still a trainee and had to work hard to become a full-fledged knight. Kirani was thrilled to train under Beryl's guidance again, and so was Alusha. That night, Beryl returned home, but as soon as he entered, he found another former student waiting for him, Randred Paddlerock, who had come to introduce his wife, Jane Paddlerock, and their newborn baby. Although happy to see Randred doing well, Beryl's mood quickly soured when his father interrupted, scolding him for coming home empty-handed and insisting that he shouldn't return until he had a family of his own like Randred. After completing his training at Beryl's dojo, Randred had risen to the rank of platinum-level adventurer, but now, as a father, he had decided to retire and settle down in the village. Reaching platinum rank was no small feat, so Beryl was surprised Randred was willing to give it up so easily. However, being an adventurer was a risky job, and with a child to care for, it made sense for Randred not to want to risk his life anymore. While he was here, Randred promised to do his best to manage the dojo, but Beryl was confused about what that meant. His father explained that since Randred was skilled enough, he could take over as the dojo's instructor, which meant Beryl no longer needed to stay there. So, his father was effectively kicking him out, even though Beryl was the owner of the house. The next day, Beryl explained the situation to Alusha and mentioned that he needed to find a place to stay in the city. The inn he had stayed at the previous night was too luxurious for long-term living, so he was looking for something more affordable. Alusha offered to help him search and even suggested Beryl stay at her place, but Beryl felt it was inappropriate, so with slight disappointment, Alusha politely accepted his refusal. Alusha then proposed they have lunch together, and Beryl agreed. They headed to a restaurant. As they walked, someone suddenly shouted at Alusha, accusing her of having no shame for walking around the city with a man and calling him master. It was clear this girl, Serena Lysandra, had a tense history with Alusha, as she found it disgraceful for a respected knight commander to openly accompany an unfamiliar man. Beryl, who had been trying to avoid trouble by hiding his face, was startled when Serena pulled off his mask to see him. Once she recognized Beryl, Serena gasped and also called him master. Beryl, completely confused, stared at her, as he had no idea who Serena was. Frustrated, Serena reminded him that she was the girl he had once saved and trained in swordsmanship. It took Beryl a moment to remember, but he eventually recalled finding an injured girl 20 years ago, bringing her home, helping her recover, and then training her to fight. However, it had been over 10 years since he last saw Serena, so he was genuinely pleased to learn that Serena was now a black-rank adventurer. Serena apologized for never visiting Beryl all this time, but she also wanted to know why Beryl was suddenly in the capital. Alusha explained that Beryl had been appointed as a special instructor for the Knight Order, so he had moved to the capital, and she was helping him find suitable lodging. However, Serena insisted that she was better at finding inns, as she was used to staying in them as an adventurer. Soon, Serena and Alusha began arguing over who should accompany Beryl to find a place to stay, leaving Beryl puzzled as to why the two were so tense with each other. Although they continued to bicker, with their help, Beryl eventually found an inn that suited his needs. Grateful, he thanked both of them but begged them to stop arguing for his sake. He couldn't take any more shouting. Respecting Beryl's wishes, they reluctantly fell silent and left together without another word. Beryl watched them from the window and, though he wasn't sure he would enjoy the hustle and bustle of city life, he felt happy to have so many former students around to look out for him. The next day, training proceeded as usual at the Knight Order, and the vice commander, Henbrit Strout, easily defeated everyone with his skill. Suddenly, Alusha stepped forward and announced a schedule change. Instead of once a week, Beryl would begin training them today, and she expected them to work harder than ever before. Beryl greeted them and expressed his happiness to be there, but before he could begin the first lesson, Henbrit approached and said he had something to say. To be a special instructor for the Liberian Order, Beryl needed to possess certain strength, so Henbritz challenged him to a duel. Henbritz meant no disrespect, he just wanted to ensure Beryl was truly worthy of the position, and as vice commander, he had the right to request a duel. Alusha permitted it, though Beryl wished Alusha wouldn't keep making decisions for him. Now that Henbritz had issued the challenge, Beryl had no choice but to prepare for the duel. Henbritz was convinced Alusha only respected Beryl because he had trained her as a child, but that didn't mean Beryl was truly qualified to be a special instructor for the Night Order, and Henbritz intended to prove it by defeating him now. Beryl actually agreed with Henbritz, he also felt he wasn't suited for this role. However, if the person Alusha recommended lost without a fight, it would tarnish her reputation. So, despite his doubts, Beryl decided to do his best against Henbritz. The duel began, and Henbritz immediately attacked Beryl. As he blocked the strikes, Beryl was surprised by his opponent's incredible strength and speed, but he remained focused. If he could deflect one of Henbritz's attacks with perfect timing, it would create an opening for a counterattack. That was exactly what Beryl did, and Henbritz was stunned because, in a real fight, that move could have killed him. Beryl scored a point, and they returned to their starting positions. Henbritz launched another attack, and although Beryl was impressed by his power, he found every one of Henbritz's moves predictable, making them easy to parry. Realizing he wouldn't be able to hit Beryl unless he went all out, Henbritz decided to use his signature technique, Roaring Sword, which had such immense power that it was impossible to parry or deflect. However, as Henbritz swung his sword, Beryl disappeared and reappeared behind him, with Beryl's sword now resting on Henbritz's shoulder. With that, Beryl officially won the duel. Henbritz wasn't upset, instead, he was amazed by the incredible skill Beryl had just demonstrated and apologized for his earlier rudeness. Some time later, Henbritz held a party to welcome Beryl as the new instructor, though he was still curious about how Beryl had countered his signature move. Beryl revealed that he had simply adjusted to Henbritz's rotation, allowing him to slip behind easily, though executing it was far more difficult than his casual explanation suggested. Henbritz couldn't wait to train under Beryl's guidance, and the other knights felt the same. A few days after Beryl became an instructor, while two knights were sparring, he approached them to offer advice. He had observed their fighting styles, and though their swordplay was quite solid, he felt they needed to improve their sense of distance. He pointed out that by focusing too much on the opponent's sword, they might unintentionally allow the opponent to get too close. It might seem trivial, but in real sword fights, half a step in distance could determine victory or defeat. Beryl thought he was just giving basic advice, but from the way everyone was staring at him, he began to wonder if he had said something foolish. However, since his duel with Henbritz, the knights took every word of Beryl's seriously, and he had to admit it made his job much easier. After that day's training ended, Beryl sat down to rest, and Henbritz handed him a towel to wipe off his sweat. Shortly after, Kearney approached Beryl and asked if he had any plans for later. Since Beryl had no particular plans, Kearney suggested showing him around the city. After thinking it over, Beryl realized he hadn't explored Baltrain much, so he agreed. Delighted, Kearney immediately ran off to change her clothes. Meanwhile, Alusha was busy in a meeting among royal officials, delivering a report on the current state of the Night Order, particularly regarding the newly appointed special instructor. She assured them that Beryl had exceeded every expectation. With nothing left to discuss, the meeting concluded. Many had warned Alusha that pursuing the role of Knight Captain would hinder her progress in swordsmanship due to the endless administrative duties. However, the only reason she accepted the position was to gain enough authority to bring Beryl to the capital. When Alusha was young, her parents took her to Beryl's dojo so she could learn to defend herself. From their first meeting, she knew Beryl was a good person. After she became part of the dojo, Beryl had her practice sword swings and jump over tree stumps to improve her agility. He also provided basic strength training, and though his methods might have been somewhat unorthodox, it wasn't long before Alusha began to feel comfortable with a sword in her hand. One afternoon, Beryl approached Alusha and asked if she wanted to have a practice match. Eager to show off what she had mastered, Alusha happily accepted. However, when they faced off, she found no openings in Beryl's stance, no weaknesses to exploit. Having trained under Beryl since childhood, Alusha assumed all sword instructors were on par with him, but that belief was shattered when Beryl arranged a practice duel against another dojo. Only then did she realize how mistaken she had been. The opponent she faced was full of openings and impatient, attacking Alusha without any real strategy. As expected, Alusha defeated them easily, with almost no challenge. After the training session ended, Beryl and his students walked back to the dojo. Beryl was glad his students had the chance to fight against warriors with different styles. Alucia asked if Beryl's dojo was truly better than the others, but Beryl disliked thinking in those terms. Though they had won the simulated battle that day, what mattered more was what they learned from the experience, not winning or losing. Alucia understood Beryl's message, but suddenly she realized her hairpin was missing. She figured she must have dropped it at the other dojo, and since the hairpin meant a lot to her, she told Beryl she would go back to retrieve it. After returning to the rival dojo, Alucia began searching for the lost hairpin. Unfortunately, it turned out the boy she had defeated had picked it up. At first glance, it seemed he would return it without issue, but that would have been too easy. Instead, he tossed the hairpin further into the dojo and mocked Alucia, declaring that if she wanted it back, she would have to fight everyone there at once. Even though he had lost the practice match, with all his friends backing him up, he was confident Alucia couldn't win. Given how poor their sword techniques were earlier, Alucia actually had a good chance of defeating them all. However, she remembered Beryl's teachings. He would never approve of using her skills just to beat people up. So, she prepared to take the hit. Just before the boy struck her face, Beryl stepped in front of Alucia and took the blow. Though the punch didn't really hurt him, it still stung. Beryl turned to the boys and asked if this was really how they used their sword skills. The boy, still unaware of his mistake, tried to hit Beryl's head this time, but Beryl easily dodged and disarmed him in one smooth motion. After that, he quickly deflected attacks from a few of the boy's friends, but before the situation escalated further, the dojo's instructor arrived on the scene. He had heard the commotion and rushed over as quickly as possible, but he was clearly disappointed to find his students acting so undisciplined. Kneeling, he sincerely apologized to Beryl and promised to ensure something like this would never happen again. Beryl and Alucia walked home together. Beryl mentioned that he felt something was off when Alucia left to retrieve the hairpin, so he followed her to make sure she was safe. Alucia felt guilty that Beryl ended up getting hit because of her, but Beryl assured her that the punch wasn't serious, and more importantly, Alucia hadn't done anything wrong, so there was no reason for her to blame herself. Instead, Beryl felt it was his fault because, as her teacher, he shouldn't have let Alucia enter a dangerous situation alone. Time passed, and Alucia found herself in another simulated fight with Beryl. Beryl's techniques were as sharp as ever, but this time, as he swung his sword, Alucia managed to match it and even scored a point for the first time. Beryl was surprised by Alucia's progress, but he felt she had reached a point where she was ready to graduate from his dojo. So, he presented her with the ceremonial graduation sword. At that moment, Alucia realized that Beryl had no idea how extraordinary his sword skills were. She desperately wanted to stay at the dojo because there was still so much she could learn from Beryl, but she didn't want to trouble him, so she didn't argue. Instead, she was determined to prove that Beryl's techniques were superior to all others. She enrolled in the Night Order program and took the entrance exam. As she predicted, none of the other candidates could match the training Beryl had provided. Even the examiners struggled to keep up with her, which meant they would be no match for Beryl. With reaction times and observational abilities that were almost superhuman, far beyond ordinary people, Alucia had no doubt that Beryl was the greatest swordsman in the world. Yet, Beryl remained unaware of his own expertise, and in Alucia's opinion, he would happily live out his life as an unknown swordsman. But Alucia refused to let her teacher remain unrecognized. With her skills, she slowly climbed the ranks of the Night Order, hoping to gain the power to support Beryl. By the time she finally achieved the position of Knight Commander, 10 years had passed since she left Beryl's dojo, and in that time, Beryl had only become more incredible. Alucia Citrus felt slightly guilty for appointing Beryl Gardnet as an instructor without asking him first, but it was the only way to get him to leave the village and gain recognition. She returned to the training hall and ran into Henbrit Strout, then asked how the training session with Beryl had gone. Henbritz replied that it was amazing and they had all benefited greatly from it today. Not seeing Beryl anywhere, Alucia wondered if he had already finished and gone home, but Henbritz explained that Beryl had actually left with Kearney Cruisil, who wanted to show him around the capital. Alucia felt a little jealous hearing that, as it meant Kearney had practically asked Beryl out on a date, and she wished she had thought of the idea first. Meanwhile, on Beryl and Kearney's date, Kearney showed him various interesting shops around the city. Beryl was amazed at how lively the place was compared to his village. However, he wondered why Kearney had brought him to the Western District, as all the tourist spots like the church and palace were supposed to be in the Northern District. Kearney agreed that Beryl was right, but after living in the city for so long, the palace and church had become a bit boring from seeing them too often. However, Beryl was genuinely excited to finally see them. As they walked through the market, Beryl suddenly heard someone call his name. He turned and saw a girl approaching him, calling him master, which meant she must be one of his students, but Beryl didn't recognize her at all. The girl seemed familiar with Kearney, but Beryl still couldn't remember who she was. The girl was disappointed that her master had forgotten her, so she pointed to her sword to remind him that she was a graduate of Beryl's dojo. Beryl thought for a few more seconds and finally remembered. Her name was Ficelle Harbler, and she had indeed been his student for 2 years, training alongside Kearney. However, her appearance back then was very different, and since it had been 5 years since they last met, it was no wonder she had changed so much, almost like a completely different person. Ficelle seemed to be doing well in the capital, as she was now a star of the Mage Corps. Beryl was happy to hear Ficelle was doing fine, though he was a bit surprised that Ficelle had joined the Mage Corps, as he didn't remember ever teaching her about magic. Kearney asked if Ficelle was here shopping, and Ficelle explained that she had come to buy magic accessories. Beryl had never heard of magic accessories, so Ficelle picked one up and explained that it allowed anyone to use magic, though she herself was capable of using magic without accessories. Beryl was surprised that Ficelle could actually use magic on her own, but it made sense since she was part of the Mage Corps. Suddenly, Beryl heard a woman scream because her bag had been stolen. As soon as he saw what was happening, Beryl prepared to chase the thief, but Ficelle told him to leave the matter to her. Ficelle drew her sword, channeled magic into it, then swung it toward the thief. The swing released a wave of magical energy that wrapped around the thief's legs, causing him to tumble to the ground. Once the thief fell, Kearney stepped in to apprehend him. Beryl was impressed with how they handled the situation, especially Ficelle's magic, as he had never seen anything like it before. Ficelle explained that she usually coated her sword with magic during fights, and Beryl's training had been very helpful in adapting magic for combat, so she was grateful. Beryl was also glad that Ficelle was still using the techniques he had taught her. The next morning, Beryl woke up early and took a walk around the city. Suddenly, he heard someone call his name. He turned and saw a young girl standing there. Beryl asked if she was lost, but the girl shouted angrily at being treated like a child, insisting that she was the head of the Mage Corps. Beryl thought the girl was just pretending and didn't take her seriously. The girl grew even more frustrated that Beryl didn't believe her, so to prove herself, she created a large fireball from the tip of her finger. That finally convinced Beryl that she really was from the Mage Corps, though he was surprised someone so small could control such powerful magic. Annoyed, the girl told him to stop calling her a little girl. Her name was Lucy Diamond, she was fully grown, even older than Beryl, and she wouldn't tolerate being treated like a child anymore. Ficelle had told her about Beryl and how amazing he was, which made Lucy want to meet him in person. She was certain Beryl was an incredible teacher, especially since Ficelle's swordsmanship was so impressive, but Beryl insisted that Ficelle's progress was the result of her own dedication. He had only taught her the basics. Beryl walked with Lucy out of politeness, but Lucy led him to a large open area, and it was clear what was about to happen. Lucy was extremely proud of her magic and practiced every day to push the limits of her abilities. The problem was, she had no worthy sparring partner strong enough. Now, with Beryl, the legendary swordsman, she was sure he would be a worthy opponent. Before Beryl could even respond, Lucy fired a blast of fire at him, but Beryl quickly jumped back and dodged it just in time. Ideally, Beryl wanted to avoid a fight, but from Lucy's intense gaze, it was clear she wouldn't back down until Beryl gave her a real match. So, Beryl drew his sword and prepared to face her. Beryl sidestepped as Lucy hurled a massive fireball, then broke into a sprint to evade her attacks. Lucy kept launching fireballs, but Beryl deftly dodged and parried each one. Realizing her approach wasn't working, Lucy switched tactics and summoned 3 ice orbs with her ice magic. With a powerful throw, she sent them flying toward Beryl, but despite their size, Beryl easily cleaved each one apart with a single swing of his sword. Now, having seen Beryl's skill, Lucy grew even more determined to keep fighting. However, Beryl wanted to end this quickly and began running straight toward her. Not wanting to hurt her, he planned to simply knock her down with the hilt of his sword, but as he closed in, Lucy suddenly wreathed herself in flames, forcing Beryl to retreat momentarily. Lucy was genuinely worried, knowing that if Beryl got too close, she'd lose instantly. Beryl began wishing he could use magic himself, as fighting magic with just a sword was proving incredibly difficult. Lucy was just starting to have fun. She summoned more fireballs behind Beryl, forcing him to run again. Lucy found it amusing to watch Beryl run without a clear plan, but it was understandable, as this was his first time fighting a mage, so he had no strategic guide. The fireballs finally stopped, and just as Beryl started to feel safe, Lucy suddenly dropped a giant ice orb on him. Luckily, Beryl saw it just in time and managed to bat it back toward Lucy, but she easily shattered it with her fire magic. As a result, a thick mist enveloped the air, obscuring Lucy's vision. Beryl tried to seize the opportunity to attack, but Lucy had another trick up her sleeve and pushed him back with a burst of lightning magic. So far, Beryl hadn't managed to land a clean hit, but Lucy hadn't managed to hit him either, and it was starting to frustrate her. She had hoped to end this using only basic spells, but since Beryl was holding out so long, she realized it was time to use her ultimate move. Beryl saw this and hesitated for a moment, thinking this might be his chance to strike, but a second later he was frozen in place as Lucy suddenly summoned a black hole. Beryl wasn't sure what it did, but it was clear that attacking recklessly was a bad idea. So, he stood his ground and carefully waited for Lucy's next move. To his surprise, however, Lucy suddenly released her spell, letting the black hole vanish. She realized there was no point in continuing if Beryl could remain calm even in the face of something like that. Prolonging the fight was meaningless. With a sigh, she apologized for going overboard and suggested they end the match. Beryl was relieved the fight was over. Dealing with someone as unpredictable as Lucy had kept him on edge the entire time. Still, curious, Beryl wondered what would have happened if Lucy had completed her spell. Lucy explained that, in theory, it would have torn Beryl's body apart. Even so, she now understood why Ficelle admired Beryl so much. Most people would faint from fear just seeing that spell, and this was the first time she'd met a swordsman like Beryl who could hold his own so well in a fight. Still, she felt bad for dragging Beryl into a sudden duel, so she told him to stop by the Magic Institution later, and she would personally make up for all the trouble she'd caused. Later that day, Beryl headed to the training hall as usual to teach the students. During a break, he ran into Ficelle in the hallway. Ficelle was there to deliver a batch of healing potions on behalf of the Magic Corps and offered one to Beryl, insisting he take it. Beryl tried to refuse since healing potions were usually expensive, but Ficelle insisted it was his way of apologizing for the incident with Lucy earlier that morning. Beryl was still half convinced that Lucy was just a little girl, but Ficelle explained that Lucy used magic to maintain her youthful appearance, so no one knew her true age. Beryl couldn't help but marvel at how such great power could be contained in such a small body. During their fight, he had genuinely feared for his life. The experience made him swear never to fight a mage again, but Ficelle assured him that Lucy was the exception. Most magic users couldn't sustain spells non-stop like Lucy. Against an average mage, Ficelle was confident Beryl would win. Just then, Alucia appeared and informed Beryl that she had just received a special request. Beryl was curious, so Alucia led him to a room where they met with Serena Lysandra. Serena told them that the Adventurers Guild wanted to hire Beryl to organize special training for new adventurers to prepare them for their first dungeon exploration. The thought of new adventurers brought Beryl back to his own youth when he dreamed of becoming an adventurer. Since dungeon treasures were so valuable, Beryl had been eager to conquer them. However, after being utterly defeated by a monster on his very first day, he ran away and never attempted adventuring again. He explained to both of them that he considered adventuring a high-risk profession for that reason. They wanted him to train new adventurers, and all the arrangements had been made so it wouldn't interfere with his role as a special instructor here. Even so, Beryl had to agree to take the job. Serena invited him to the Adventurers Guild to meet with the guild master and discuss the job. The Adventurers Guild wasn't far, so Serena promptly took Beryl there. Upon arrival, they entered the guild master's office, but to Beryl's surprise, he saw Lucy Diamond sitting on the sofa, waiting. Lucy had heard about the job offer Beryl received from the Adventurers Guild, and since she was close friends with the guildmaster, she rushed over to meet Beryl again. The guildmaster, Nidus, then stepped forward and introduced himself. After everything Serena and Lucy had told him about Beryl, he was confident choosing Beryl was the right decision. Beryl tried to interject, reminding Nidus that he hadn't actually agreed to take the job yet, but his protest was brushed aside. Nidus pointed to his assistant, Megan, and told Beryl that he could discuss the job details with Megan. However, before that, Megan wanted to clarify something. He asked if Beryl had any experience as an adventurer, and Beryl said no. Megan began to doubt whether Beryl was truly suitable for training new adventurers. Beryl felt relieved by Megan's skepticism, thinking he might not have to take the job after all. However, Megan's comments angered Serena and Lucy, who were already fully supportive of Beryl. Despite their support, Megan remained unconvinced. Respectfully, Megan explained that he was only concerned about protecting the new adventurers, especially since there had been worrying reports of unusual monster activity lately. Nidus understood Megan's point and asked what Beryl would need to do to gain his approval. Megan replied that if Beryl could defeat Serena, a black rank adventurer, in a duel, then he would prove himself a capable instructor. That sounded simple enough, and since Serena agreed, though Beryl was dismayed, Nidus said he would arrange the duel right away. Soon after, Beryl and Serena were on the training grounds, and a large crowd had gathered to see who the legendary Serena was fighting. Serena was just as excited to spar with his teacher again. When Serena was a child, he traveled with his parents as part of a merchant caravan. However, during the journey, a monster attacked, destroying one of the wagons. In a final act of love, Serena's parents threw him over the edge of a cliff to save his life, making him the sole survivor of the tragedy. When he came to, the first person he saw was Beryl staring down at him. Beryl took him home to tend to his wounds, and after Serena felt a little better, Beryl began asking him some questions. He got Serena to state his name, but when asked about his parents, Serena had a panic attack. Beryl told him to rest until he felt better. Since Serena had nowhere else to go, Beryl asked his parents, Mordia and friend Gardnant, if they would let Serena stay with them at least until they found him a new home, and they agreed. From that moment on, Serena practically became part of the family. At first, he kept his distance, reluctant to trust them, until one morning he saw Beryl practicing with his sword. Sensing his curiosity, Beryl invited him to practice together. From then on, Serena took every opportunity to learn from him, as Beryl guided him through the basics of swordsmanship. Their relationship deepened, forming a strong bond, and Serena became more open. One morning, as Beryl was preparing to start class at his dojo, he saw Serena waiting outside with a sword in hand, so he invited him to join. Serena devoted himself fully to sword training, and part of him wanted to stay with Beryl's family forever. However, when a kind family offered to take him in, Beryl and his parents convinced him that this would be the best path for his future. Though his heart resisted leaving, he didn't want to be a burden to Beryl. With deep gratitude for all Beryl had done, he said his goodbyes. Several years later, Serena had become a gold-rank adventurer, and while on an escort mission, the caravan was suddenly attacked by a group of bandits. The bandit leader was known as a highly skilled swordsman, so his teammates warned Serena to be cautious. But before he knew it, Serena had leapt into action against the bandits, and shortly after, they were all lying unconscious on the ground. Serena became an adventurer for two important reasons. First, he wanted to prevent as many tragedies as possible so others wouldn't suffer as he had. Second, he was determined to make the most of everything Beryl had taught him, using those skills for meaningful work. Now, 20 years later, he had the chance to face Beryl again, and he planned to show just how much he had grown since they last met. Beryl wasn't too thrilled about this duel, but he could see how excited Serena was, so as his teacher, he felt obligated to give him a good fight. As the duel began, Serena unleashed a relentless flurry of sword strikes toward Beryl. His speed was incredible, but Beryl managed to keep up with his every move, preventing Serena from landing a single blow. Serena was thrilled with how the fight was going, as it had been a long time since he could fight at full strength without worrying about hurting his opponent. Beryl was also pleased to see how much Serena had improved since he last saw him. He could tell that Serena had trained tirelessly to reach his current skill level. However, he wasn't perfect. Beryl noticed a weakness in his fighting technique. The attacks from his left hand were somewhat stiff, allowing Beryl to slip his sword through Serena's hilt and knock it out of his hand. Serena tried to counter with his remaining sword, but Beryl quickly swept his legs out from under him, causing him to fall, then pressed his sword against Serena's neck as he lay on the ground. With that, Beryl officially won the duel. The others came down to congratulate him on his victory, and Megan sincerely apologized for doubting Beryl's skills. Beryl said there was no need to apologize, as it was natural to be skeptical of an instructor you'd never seen before. Now that Megan was satisfied with Beryl's abilities, nothing stood in the way of Beryl becoming the special instructor here. The next day, Beryl met with the adventurer trainees in front of a dungeon. Their names were Porta, Nidri, and Sarlix. As they entered the dungeon, Sarlix's magic clock warned that there were 6 monsters ahead, so everyone prepared for battle. Beryl and Serena were only there to ensure nothing went wrong, so they stayed relaxed and let the young ones handle the fighting. Once they encountered the first group of goblins, they managed to defeat them in no time. The group pressed onward, and soon enough, they cleared the dungeon without encountering any serious trouble. They then returned to the entrance. After returning to town, the training would officially be over. However, Beryl found it strange that the dungeon had so few monsters. Just at that moment, as Porta stepped out of the dungeon, Sarlix's magic clock detected something so powerful that the clock cracked. Beryl shouted for Porta to stop, but the warning came too late. Porta was attacked. He was still alive, but badly injured and in need of immediate medical attention. Unfortunately, Beryl and Serena couldn't help Porta until they defeated the monster, and that was no easy task. This creature was a special threat known as a Zanod Grail, so powerful that even top-ranked adventurers wouldn't be able to defeat it. Even so, they had no choice but to face it in battle. Beryl regretted joining this mission, but at least Serena was by his side. As a black-rank adventurer, Serena should have no trouble dealing with that monster. While Serena handled the monster, Beryl intended to help Porta, but as he reached for a healing potion, Serena stopped him and declared that he would assist Porta instead. Before Beryl could react, the griffin suddenly lunged at him. Beryl barely managed to dodge, and now he had no choice but to fight. As the griffin swiped with its claws, Beryl deftly blocked each strike with his sword. Spotting an opening, he immediately targeted the griffin's leg, but the scales covering it were as hard as stone, making his slashes completely ineffective. For now, he was forced to defend, doing everything he could to hold out long enough for Serena to get Porta to safety. As he focused on Serena, Beryl was momentarily distracted, almost paying with his life. Fortunately, he managed to block the attack just in time, though he still suffered a deep wound. Now, he had to find a way to defeat this creature before he was overwhelmed. In scenarios like this, Beryl would usually focus his attacks on the monster's head. However, since the griffin could breathe fire, a direct frontal approach wouldn't allow him to get close. Instead, Beryl chose to attack from the side, but the griffin noticed and countered with a swift tail sweep. Even so, Beryl recovered and severed the griffin's tail with one swing. This enraged the griffin, causing it to spew a large fireball at Beryl, who was forced to leap backward. He had anticipated that cutting its tail would anger the griffin, but he hadn't expected it to charge directly at him. The griffin rammed its head into Beryl's body. Though the impact was painful, Beryl was otherwise fine. He adjusted his stance and waited for the griffin's fury to subside. However, that was easier said than done, for as Beryl held on tightly to the griffin's back, the creature suddenly took flight, shooting straight into the sky. Falling from such a height would be fatal for Beryl, so he held on with all his might. This only made the griffin angrier. Eventually, the griffin descended back to the ground, allowing Beryl to jump off its back. Now, the griffin was holding nothing back. It chanted a spell to heat the ground around it, turning it into lava, forcing Beryl to stand on a rock to avoid being burned alive. However, Beryl Gardnet wasn't the only one at risk of being burned, as the lava quickly flooded the cave, and it was only a matter of time before the children inside succumbed to the scorching heat. Hearing their desperate cries for help, Beryl could no longer focus on his own safety. He began running across the lava to confront the griffin, his shoes protecting him temporarily. Yet, as he fought the griffin, he still struggled to penetrate the creature's hard and tireless body. The griffin began hurling more fireballs at him, so Beryl had to run and dodge across the lava. One of the fireball blasts sent Beryl flying into the air, but he used the moment to plunge his sword into the griffin's eye. The creature let out a cry of pain and threw Beryl away. The good news was that Beryl's sword remained lodged in the griffin's eye, rendering it blind. However, the bad news was that Beryl now had no weapon to fight or parry with, and the griffin, angry and in pain, seemed ready to crush Beryl. Suddenly, something distracted the griffin, causing it to glance upward, and there was Serena Lysandra jumping from the cliff edge with her sword drawn, ready to deliver the final blow. Serena slammed into the creature with full force, knocking it to the ground before the griffin could react, then swung her sword at the griffin's neck, ending its life for good. Seeing Beryl's shattered sword still stuck in the griffin's eye, Serena apologized. If she had arrived sooner to help, this wouldn't have happened. But Beryl assured her it was nothing to dwell on now. His main concern was the students. Just as he said this, the children began emerging from the cave, and against all odds, they escaped without serious burns. In the end, though things were difficult, everything turned out all right. The group returned to the Adventurers Guild to inform the guild master, Nidus, about the incident. Nidus was amazed to learn that Beryl and Serena had managed to defeat a monster named Zanod Grail. Serena explained that without Beryl's magnanimous decision to join this mission, she would have surely perished against the creature. Beryl tried to point out that it was Serena who delivered the final blow, but Serena refused the desire to take credit for the feat. Nidus praised Beryl for his outstanding work and promised to reward him for it. Meanwhile, he asked if Beryl would consider becoming an adventurer, but Beryl promptly declined the suggestion. Afterward, he and Serena stepped outside, and Serena apologized again, acknowledging that Beryl only got involved in this ordeal because she had bragged about Beryl's strength to everyone. Beryl reassured her that he didn't mind, though he still felt unworthy of all the praise he received. However, Serena insisted that Beryl was truly great and expressed her gratitude for the chance to fight alongside him in a life-or-death battle. Beryl, in turn, thanked Serena, noting that her flawless decisions were crucial in ensuring they all returned alive. Serena was happy to accept Beryl's praise but felt she hadn't earned it yet. However, Beryl insisted that Serena had fully earned his admiration for maturing into an exceptional adventurer. The next morning, Beryl woke up early. His damaged sword needed repairs, but he was still unfamiliar with the capital. That was why he asked Kearney Cruisil to take him to the blacksmith shop. He thanked Kearney for helping on such short notice, but Kearney said she already planned to visit the blacksmith today, so it was no trouble. Alucia Citrus also chose to tag along, though certainly not out of jealousy. She claimed her presence was due to the importance of choosing a sword, and she wanted to help Beryl make the best decision. However, in truth, she had missed every previous opportunity to go out with Beryl, so she was determined not to miss this chance as well. When they arrived at the blacksmith shop, the owner, Balder Gasp, came out to greet Kearney, but as soon as he saw Beryl, his expression changed. Unexpectedly, he had met his teacher here. Years ago, Balder was one of Beryl's students, even the oldest he had trained at the time. Balder joined the dojo believing that mastering the sword would make him a better blacksmith one day. Even so, he never took Beryl's lessons lightly. Now, judging from the forge behind him, it seemed he had truly achieved his dream. With everyone present, Balder asked how he could help. Kearney stepped forward first, stating that her short sword needed sharpening. Balder gladly agreed and asked her to show him the sword. Kearney handed it over, and Balder examined it carefully for a moment, but then he dropped it and told Kearney that he could do nothing because the sword was completely ruined. Alucia found it strange that Kearney had damaged her sword, given how precise she usually was during practice, but if that were the case, there was only one explanation for the sword's condition. Beryl turned to Kearney and asked how it felt when she held the short sword. After a moment of reflection, Kearney replied that the sword felt light. Hearing this, Beryl and Balder immediately understood the problem. They explained that Kearney was unsuited for short swords, as failing to feel the weapon's weight meant she wouldn't be able to wield it effectively. With that issue resolved, they now needed to find a new sword for Kearney. Beryl suggested a large two-handed sword might suit her. Though Kearney was small, she was also very strong, so the weight shouldn't be an issue. Beryl handed one over for her to try, and though it was clearly heavier than what Kearney was used to, it was still manageable enough for combat. After a few practice swings, Kearney decided to buy it. After all, Beryl had recommended it, and she couldn't deny how impressive it looked sheathed on her back. With Kearney's shopping done, Beryl began browsing Balder's collection for a new sword for himself. However, Alucia insisted that a swordsman of Beryl's caliber deserved a custom-made sword. Beryl felt such efforts were unnecessary, as the available swords here should be more than adequate. As he was still examining the options, Serena entered carrying a large sack. As soon as Alucia and Serena made eye contact, they began bickering, unable to tolerate each other. However, Beryl diverted the conversation, asking what brought Serena here. Serena mentioned that she came because she had a special task for Balder. She tossed her sack onto the front table and opened it, revealing the griffin leg she and Beryl had defeated. She then told Balder that she wanted him to make a longsword from this material. Balder was astonished. This was the first request he had received to forge a longsword from the remains of a named monster. However, he couldn't help but ask why Serena needed a longsword, given her reputation for using twin swords. Serena explained that she actually wanted to give the sword to Beryl. However, Beryl felt unworthy of receiving such an extravagant sword. He reminded Serena that she had delivered the final blow, so she deserved to keep the monster leg for herself. But Serena insisted on gifting the sword to Beryl, as it was the only way she could make up for Beryl's lost sword. Balder suddenly interrupted, urging Beryl to accept the gift, not because he was taking sides, but because he was excited to take on the challenge of forging an impressive sword from a named monster's leg. Beryl reluctantly agreed to have the sword forged from the monster leg, but from Balder's expression, he could tell that Balder was planning something extravagant. Beryl warned Balder that he only wanted a standard sword, and Balder assured him that he wouldn't make anything strange. Even so, for some reason, Beryl remained skeptical of Balder's promise. Balder explained that, in any case, crafting his masterpiece would take time. He asked for a week to complete the work, and Beryl agreed without issue. With their business concluded, Beryl mentioned that it was time for them to leave. Just as he said this, Kearney approached Beryl with a small request. She had just obtained a new sword and needed to learn how to use it properly, so she asked if Beryl would be willing to provide specialized training. Beryl explained that great swords had two main functions. First, they allowed for delivering powerful heavy strikes, with sideways swings being the ideal way to maximize momentum. Second, gripping the blade at the ricasso provided better control and made the weapon easier to handle. Kirani gave it a try, and the motion brought back old memories of her training at Beryl's dojo, spending hours perfecting her sword swings. That night, after a day's work, Beryl visited a tavern to enjoy a fine cup of wine. However, it was already late, so he left a few coins on the table and departed. As Beryl walked home alone, he noticed a child approaching him. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have thought much of it, but as they passed each other, the child tried to slip his hand into Beryl's jacket to steal his money. Beryl caught him in the act and grabbed his arm, preventing him from fleeing. Suddenly, without warning, the child released a burst of fire magic at Beryl to startle him. The diversion worked. Beryl had no choice but to release him as he shielded himself from the flames. Seizing the moment, the child ran into the darkness, eventually slipping into a building where several men were gambling. As he passed by them, he handed over all the money he had managed to steal that night. The men, unsatisfied with the amount, accused him of being lazy, but their boss interrupted, silencing them and insisting that Mui wouldn't slack off intentionally. After all, Mui knew full well the consequences of defying him. Mui's face remained blank, but he was all too familiar with his boss's cruelty, so he couldn't afford to keep making mistakes. Suddenly, he realized he had made a grave error. In his hurry to escape from Beryl, he had accidentally dropped his ring somewhere, and to his horror, he knew Beryl had just found it. The next day in the training room, Kirani continued honing her skills with her new greatsword, while on the other side, Henbritz Drought was having a practice match with Beryl. Despite his efforts, Henbritz hadn't managed to land a single blow. As he made one last attempt, he feigned an overhead strike and instead targeted Beryl's midsection. Beryl found the move impressive but still effortlessly parried it, securing yet another victory. Henbritz expressed his gratitude for the lesson, and Beryl praised him for the progress he'd made in such a short time. The maneuver was nearly perfect, but it still wasn't enough to overcome Beryl's sharp reflexes. At that moment, Henbritz glanced at Kirani and commented that switching weapons so abruptly took real courage, yet Kirani showed great potential. Boosting the Night Order's combat strength was crucial if they were to confront a band of thieves known as the Twilight Hand. Recently, the Twilight Thieves had begun causing chaos in the capital, creating numerous problems. As a result, both the Royal Guards and the Night Order were conducting investigations. Once they pinpointed the Twilight's hideout, they planned to raid it and capture every thief. However, to ensure success, they needed every capable fighter, and Kirani clearly had great ability. Henbritz was confident Beryl could easily defeat the Twilight Thieves alone, but he preferred not to trouble Beryl with such mundane tasks. Instead, he told Beryl that he could leave all the fighting to the Night Order Knights. After all, Beryl had no desire to get involved in battles. He had never faced criminals in the past, and he didn't intend to start now. However, he remembered the ring he had taken from the pickpocket yesterday and considered whether it could aid the investigation. But when Kirani saw the ring in his hand, she assumed Beryl intended to gift it to someone, and Henbritz agreed with her. Beryl tried to explain that the ring wasn't for a gift, but before he could speak, Kirani suggested that if Beryl planned to propose to Alusha, he might need a larger ring since this one wouldn't fit her finger. Beryl had no idea where Kirani got the impression that he would propose to anyone, but he finally got a chance to speak and explained that he had actually been the target of a pickpocket yesterday. He caught the pickpocket's hand before she could take anything, but she escaped because when she hit Beryl with fire magic, it completely startled him. Kirani found the situation odd, reasoning that if the girl had magical abilities, she wouldn't be pickpocketing. Magic was a rare skill, and those who possessed it could enroll in the Magic Institute for free, with all living expenses covered. Henbritz proposed that the girl might have used a magic accessory to create the fire, but regardless, he turned to Beryl and asked what he planned to do with the ring. Beryl explained that he didn't intend to keep it, considering it was likely stolen. He preferred to see it returned to its rightful owner. Hearing this, Henbritz suggested that Beryl leave the ring at the Night Order's front desk, and that's exactly what Beryl did. Now that the ring matter was settled, Beryl had no intention of getting further involved in the issue. The pickpocket hadn't actually stolen anything from him, and he saw no reason to pursue her. However, something about the way the girl had looked at him when caught continued to bother him. As Beryl walked through the city, he decided it was time to check out the housing market. After all, he couldn't stay at the inn forever. But once he saw the prices, his heart nearly stopped. Indeed, his salary from the Night Order was technically sufficient, but it was still a huge amount of money to spend. Just then, he noticed a girl behind him who seemed to be searching for something. He approached to offer help, but upon closer inspection, he recognized her as the one who had tried to rob him the previous night. He asked if she was looking for the ring, and upon hearing Beryl mention it, the girl became angry, thinking Beryl had stolen it. However, Beryl urged her to calm down as he wanted to avoid a scene. He explained that he had left the ring at the Night Order's front desk, so it was no longer in his possession. Of course, the girl couldn't just walk into the Night Order to retrieve it. Next, Beryl asked if she had actually stolen the ring, pointing out how strange it was that she was trying so hard to get it back if it meant nothing to her. The girl insisted that she hadn't stolen it, and for Beryl, that was answer enough. He told her to come with him so they could retrieve it together. Mui hesitated at first, but Beryl warned that proving ownership would be difficult if she went alone, whereas with his support, retrieving it should be quick. Reluctantly, Mui agreed to follow, though she made no effort to hide her displeasure with the situation. Upon arriving at the Night Order headquarters, Beryl retrieved the ring, but before handing it over to Mui, he mentioned that he wanted to have a brief talk with her. Just then, Alucia appeared, and seeing Beryl in a heated discussion with Mui, her first thought was that Mui must be Beryl's secret child he had never mentioned. However, Beryl quickly denied it. The group went inside so Beryl could explain the entire situation to Alucia. Now aware of what had happened, Alucia asked Beryl what he planned to do with Mui. Normally, as a knight, arresting Mui for pickpocketing would be Alucia's responsibility. However, Beryl didn't want to get Mui into trouble. He asked Mui if she would stop pickpocketing if let go, but instead of answering, Mui just demanded that Beryl return her ring. Clearly, she had no intention of stopping, but the fact that she didn't lie showed Beryl that deep down, Mui was an honest child. Alucia remembered hearing that Mui had used magic against Beryl, so she asked if it was done with a magic accessory or naturally. Mui admitted that she had done it herself. Hearing this, Alucia explained that if Mui had a natural talent for magic, the kingdom would provide for all her needs, so she wouldn't need to rely on pickpocketing to survive. Mui began to open up a little, revealing that she couldn't stop because she needed to collect 5 million doc. She shared that her boss had promised to use magic to resurrect her younger sister if she paid that amount. However, she didn't have time to earn such a large sum legally, which was why she had turned to crime. Beryl understood that Mui's boss was surely deceiving her, resurrecting the dead was utterly impossible. But he knew saying so directly wouldn't work, as Mui wouldn't believe him in her current state. Just then, Alucia stepped out to investigate something she needed to confirm. Meanwhile, Beryl and Mui were left alone. Beryl offered some snacks, and although Mui refused, her obvious hunger convinced Beryl it was a good idea. He stepped away briefly and returned with a piece of bread for Mui. As soon as Beryl gave it to her, Mui eagerly began eating. Beryl felt relieved to have met her today, as he had been worried about Mui since seeing the sad expression on her face yesterday. Being able to help, even just a little, brought him joy. After detaining Mui long enough, Beryl finally returned her ring. Now with the ring in hand, Mui announced she would leave, but before she could step out, Lucy Diamond burst in. Alucia had informed her about Mui's potential magic, and as head of the Magic Corps, Lucy introduced herself and invited Mui to join the Magic Institute, emphasizing that magic users were always welcome there. However, Mui refused the offer outright, insisting that she could never earn 5 million doc at the Institute. Lucy asked about Mui's plans with all the money she was collecting. Mui shared that she intended to pay a sorcerer to resurrect her deceased younger sister. Hearing this, Lucy immediately told her that she was being deceived, as resurrection magic wasn't real. However, Mui remained convinced that her sister could be brought back to life, claiming she had witnessed it herself, or at least that's what she thought. In her flashback, all the sorcerer had done was make her sister's body twitch slightly. Overwhelmed by grief, Mui instantly believed the sorcerer could truly resurrect her sister, but the sorcerer claimed he needed 5 million doc to do it fully, which was why Mui turned to pickpocketing to gather the money. Lucy couldn't help but feel pity for Mui falling victim to such a cruel scam, but she gently explained that resurrection magic didn't exist at all. Mui retorted, accusing Lucy of lying, but Lucy asserted that as a renowned sorceress with years of experience, if resurrection magic were real, she would have known about it long before that dubious sorcerer. At this point, Mui began to suspect she might have been tricked. Lucy then asked for the name of the sorcerer who started this scheme. Mui asked why Lucy needed to know, and Lucy explained that she intended to confront the sorcerer and determine whether he was lying about resurrection magic. If by chance the sorcerer was honest, Lucy promised to personally cover the 5 million doc to resurrect Mui's sister. But if the man was lying, it meant he had disrespected the soul of Mui's sister, and Lucy wouldn't let that go unpunished. Mui told her that the man's name was Twilight, the leader of the Twilight Thieves. Lucy asked Mui to take her to him immediately. Alucia said she wanted to come too, but the presence of knights would attract too much attention, so she asked Beryl to go with Lucy instead. Soon after, they arrived at the entrance to Twilight's hideout, and Beryl couldn't hide his surprise. He hadn't expected the thieves' hideout to be so conspicuous along the main street. Part of him now regretted not borrowing a proper sword for this confrontation, but Lucy quickly reassured him that with his skills, a wooden sword should be enough against a handful of bandits. With no reason to delay further, Lucy blasted the front door open in an instant, and immediately they were faced with a group of thieves. One of the thieves tried to grab Lucy, but she had no patience for such small-time bandits. She blasted the thief backward and instructed Beryl to handle the others while she went to confront Twilight. The thieves noticed Mui standing behind Beryl and realized she had betrayed them. One of them lunged at Mui, but Beryl swiftly struck his throat. Armed only with a wooden sword, the bandits would likely withstand it, but a blow to the throat with a wooden sword was extremely painful, causing them to stagger. As Beryl handled the situation upstairs, Lucy went down to the basement to face Twilight. Upon seeing Lucy, Twilight used a magic accessory to throw an ice ball at her, but as a seasoned sorceress, Lucy was unfazed by such an attack. She easily melted the ice, only to find that Twilight had more magic accessories. He then used telekinesis magic to lift Lucy off the ground, and Lucy realized this must be the trick used to deceive Mui. Twilight admitted that he hadn't used necromancy at all. Instead, he had merely manipulated Mui's sister's body with telekinesis to sell the lie. Even now, he couldn't help but laugh at how easily Mui had been fooled, truly believing he could resurrect the dead. As Twilight gathered a fireball in his hand, intending to drop it on Lucy, Lucy's patience ran out. She summoned a gust of wind right in front of Twilight, knocking him unconscious with a single blast of pressure. Upstairs, Beryl had just finished dealing with most of the bandits. However, one stubborn thug staggered back to his feet. He began insulting Mui, calling her ungrateful after all Twilight had supposedly done for her. That was the last straw for Beryl Gardnant. He struck the thug's throat again, sending him crashing back to the ground. Shortly after, Lucy Diamond emerged from the basement dragging Twilight, ordering him to tell Mui the truth if he didn't want to face another wind blast. Reluctantly, Twilight admitted to Mui that he had lied about resurrection magic, breaking Mui's heart as she realized she would never see her sister again. With all the bandits subdued, Lucy announced that she would contact the Night Order to arrest Twilight and his underlings. Later, the bandits were loaded into a cart, ready to be transported to prison. Alucia Citrus expressed her gratitude to Beryl and Lucy for their help. However, there was still much investigation to be done, as the magic accessories Twilight used were too powerful for someone of his caliber to obtain on his own. This confirmed that someone else was pulling Twilight's strings from behind the scenes, and now they had to uncover who was responsible. As Twilight and his gang were on their way to prison, a mysterious figure watched from the shadows. Without warning, the stranger raised a hand toward the cart, and Twilight's body suddenly began to burn with an eerie inner light before he collapsed, dead in agony. Then, the mysterious man reported to his superior, confirming that Twilight had been permanently silenced thanks to the magic device they had secretly implanted in him, ensuring their plans wouldn't be exposed. Bishop Revio Sarium was pleased to hear this, as he planned to use the corpses Twilight had collected for him to recreate the miracle of God with his own hands. The next day, after Beryl finished training the knights, Alucia approached her because she had something to share. She explained that during the transport of Twilight the day before, it had suddenly exploded without warning, leaving behind only a magical device. Currently, the Magic Corps was investigating the origin of the device, but so far, they had found nothing. Beryl asked about the missing corpses that were under Twilight's supervision, and Alucia informed her that she had already interrogated some of Twilight's subordinates, but none of them seemed to have any information about what happened to the bodies. All of this suggested that Twilight was following someone else's orders, and they needed to uncover who that was as quickly as possible. Later that day, Beryl returned to the blacksmith's shop to pick up the newly forged sword and was thoroughly satisfied with the result. She couldn't wait to try it out once she and Kirani Cruisil returned to the training room. However, as she approached, she saw Lucy Diamond standing outside waiting for her, and from her expression, she was there for something serious. Lucy told her that she had an urgent matter to discuss and invited her to her house to talk. A short while later, they arrived at Lucy's residence, and Beryl was amazed, having had no idea that Lucy lived in such a large mansion. There, she asked about Mui's well-being, and Lucy shared that she was still trying to convince Mui to pursue magic studies. The two of them entered the house, and after preparing a cup of tea for herself, Lucy chose to introduce Beryl to the man sitting across from her. He was Ibroy Hellman, a priest from the Sven Church. Beryl was pleased to meet him but remained puzzled by the presence of a church representative. Lucy revealed that all the magical devices possessed by Twilight were originally created by the Sven nation but were secretly supplied to criminals like Twilight through a bishop named Revios Sarian. In return, Revios demanded that Twilight collect corpses for him. This, Lucy explained, was the reason why Twilight was ultimately silenced using one of those devices. However, Beryl was still confused as to why Revios was seeking corpses. Ibroy explained that in the Sven Church, magic was considered divine miracle, and among the many possible miracles, one was regarded as the most challenging, resurrecting the dead. Of course, Ibroy doubted the possibility of such a resurrection, but he suspected that Revios was likely experimenting with it, which explained the collection of corpses. If Ibroy knew all this, Beryl asked why he hadn't taken action to stop Revios. Unfortunately, things weren't that simple. Revios currently resided in the Sven Church in the city's northern district, and the Night Order intended to summon him for interrogation the next day. Ideally, he would cooperate, but there was a risk he would attempt to flee to the border. If Revios managed to return to Sven territory, the Night Order would lose all authority to pursue him. That was why they hoped Beryl could help. They needed someone to intercept Revios if he tried to escape. Under normal circumstances, the Night Order or the Magic Corps would have no trouble detaining him, but using force against a Sven bishop risked triggering an international dispute. Even Ibroy couldn't intervene directly because he lacked the authority to challenge a bishop's status. Beryl was the ideal solution. Her combat skills made her capable of defeating Revios, while her unofficial status meant the kingdom wouldn't face political repercussions from her actions. Lucy had already informed Alucia of this plan, granting Beryl full authorization to use any means necessary to prevent Revios from fleeing, but that only applied if Revios chose to run. If the accusations against him proved true, Lucy wanted to ensure Revios faced consequences for what he had tried to do. Beryl wasn't overly concerned about a bishop attempting to resurrect the dead. However, there was a chance she could retrieve Mui's younger sister's body for her. Mui's sister wouldn't return, but if Mui had the chance to grieve properly, perhaps she could move on. So, in the end, Beryl decided to accept Lucy's offer. Lucy expressed her gratitude and assured Beryl that she would compensate her fairly for her help. Just as Beryl opened the front door to leave, she nearly bumped into Mui, who had just returned from shopping. Surprised to see her, Mui asked what brought her here today. Beryl explained that she had just stopped by to chat with Lucy for a bit, but she added that she was happy to see her again. Seeing Mui doing well made her happy, especially knowing that she was in good condition. Mui was still struggling to understand why Beryl and Lucy were going to such lengths to help her. She was a thief who had tried to rob Beryl, yet they saved her from Twilight and were now providing her with a home and care. She couldn't comprehend why they cared so much about her. Beryl understood that Mui must be confused by the sudden changes in her life, but she assured her that there was no need to worry. None of the adults here would betray or exploit her like Twilight had, so she could relax and enjoy her youth going forward. Mui wondered if it was really okay for her to have a happy life, and Beryl assured her that she had a future full of brightness and hope. She reached out to pat Mui's head, but Mui brushed her hand away, disliking being treated like a child. Seeing this, Beryl chose to give her space for now, confident that Mui would grow more comfortable with everyone around her in time. That night, Beryl moved stealthily around the Northern District Church, watching for any suspicious activity from Revios. As she suspected, she found Revios and his subordinates packing their belongings, preparing to flee the country. Hoping to intercept them, Beryl tried to sneak around the back, but a robed man suddenly blocked her path. The man recognized Beryl as the one who had defeated all of Twilight's followers and revealed that he had predicted Beryl would be sent to stop them. Beryl realized this approach likely wouldn't work, but she still had to inform them that Revios was scheduled for interrogation tomorrow and was therefore not permitted to leave the country. As expected, the man disregarded the order and called upon 3 swordsmen to confront Beryl. He even allowed them to use magic against her. The 3 swordsmen touched the tips of their swords together and chanted a spell that enhanced their strength and speed. Now moving much faster than before, they would be difficult for Beryl to keep up with. Meanwhile, with Beryl occupied by the 3 swordsmen, Revios and Spur retreated into the church to gather the rest of their belongings for escape. It had been a long time since Beryl last fought with lethal intent, but she knew holding back now meant certain death. As the first attacker lunged at her, Beryl sidestepped with precision and delivered a deep slash to the man's chest. Seeing this, the remaining two realized the threat Beryl posed and coordinated their attacks, pressing her simultaneously to buy time until reinforcements arrived. Now surrounded by 5 attackers, even for Beryl, this was a bit too much to handle alone. Fortunately, she wasn't alone. Just as one of the swordsmen was about to slash Beryl, a wind spell knocked the sword from his hand. Facel Harbler then ran over and told Beryl that he was here to help, and Kirini Cruisil was also present. Beryl was confused by their presence. After all, the entire plan was designed to keep the Night Order and the Magic Corps from direct involvement. The two explained that they weren't acting on official orders, they just happened to be nearby and chose to help Beryl, nothing more. Although Beryl wasn't entirely convinced that was the case, she was still relieved to have assistance. With that, the three of them began cutting down enemies together. At one point, Beryl faced off against one of the swordsmen, and moments later, the blue light on the man's body faded. The swordsman froze and collapsed. Beryl took the opportunity to take him down, though she didn't understand what had just happened. Facel explained that the swordsman's enhancement spell had likely faded, leaving them vulnerable to side effects, which should make them easier to defeat. However, more reinforcements were approaching, so Facel and Kirini assured Beryl that they could handle the situation here and urged her to pursue Revios. Beryl expressed her gratitude for their help and hurried into the church to track down Revios. But before she could reach him, Spur stepped forward as Revios began chanting a spell. He told Beryl that she would be the first to witness the miracle of life that Revios had dedicated himself to studying. Once the spell was complete, the nearby coffin began to shake. Moments later, the body inside began to move. It seemed Revios had achieved some success in his resurrection magic research, or at least partial success, as these individuals were essentially zombies. Beryl spotted Mui's younger sister among the zombies, and it reminded her of how much Mui wanted her sister resurrected. However, she also knew that Mui wouldn't want to see her sister like this. It left her facing a difficult decision. She realized she had no choice but to destroy the corpses. When one of the zombies suddenly grabbed her leg, Beryl quickly decapitated it. The zombie immediately exploded in blue flames. Seeing this, Beryl repeated the same action with the others until only Mui's sister remained. She had hoped to let Mui grieve by bringing her sister's body back, but now it was clear that wouldn't happen. With an apology, she swung her sword at Mui's sister's neck. Mui's sister exploded in blue flames, vanishing completely, leaving only a ring behind. However, Beryl's problems weren't over yet, as Spur returned, determined to end her. Spur lunged at Beryl with full force. Beryl blocked the first attack, but Spur turned out to be far more skilled than expected, quickly gaining the upper hand. Spur managed to stab Beryl in the shoulder, but Beryl wouldn't accept defeat. She gathered her composure and struck directly at Spur. As Spur tried to attack her, Beryl dodged just in time and countered with a slash to Spur's shoulder. Spur never expected someone as young as Beryl to still match his speed, even after using a magic boost. However, he had one last trick. He pulled out a dagger and stabbed it into his own arm to grant himself an additional power boost. Spur attacked Beryl again, and now Beryl struggled to defend herself. Spur's attacks came so fast that Beryl ended up with minor injuries all over her body. It was clear that Spur was one of the toughest enemies Beryl had ever faced, but that didn't mean Beryl planned to retreat. If she couldn't match Spur in speed, then she had to outsmart him with strategy. As Spur thrust his sword at Beryl once more, Beryl leaned into the attack, using her shoulder to deflect the blow. Yes, Beryl suffered a severe injury to her shoulder, but this created the perfect opportunity for her to slip past Spur's defenses and deliver a deep slash to Spur's chest. The blow should have been enough to end him, yet somehow Spur remained standing, even as the side effects of his magic boost began to take hold. He continued advancing toward Beryl, blood flowing from every wound on his body. Beryl told him to surrender, insisting that he had lost, but as long as Spur was still breathing, he refused to stop fighting. Beryl was both impressed and disturbed by Spur's determination, but soon the burden of his injuries finally overcame him, and he collapsed to the ground, dead. Now, with everything settled, Beryl stepped outside and saw that Kirini and Facel had successfully captured Revios. She thanked them for handling everything so well. Beryl then confronted Revios, but there wasn't a hint of remorse on the man's face. Even after hearing of Spur's defeat, Revios only commented that Spur must have gladly given his life for their mission, and although they had captured him, it meant nothing without the creation of miracles through blood. The world was already lost. Beryl didn't know what Revios meant, but she dismissed it as the ramblings of a madman. The next morning, she met with Lucy to report everything that had happened. She was deeply disappointed that she couldn't recover Mui's sister's body intact. Seeing her sadness, Lucy told her to come with her so she could give her the promised reward. Lucy took her to a house in the city and revealed that this was her gift. Beryl was somewhat surprised. She had indeed been looking for a house lately, so this came at the perfect time. Lucy encouraged her to go inside and check it out, and to her surprise, Beryl saw Mui cleaning the house. Curious, she asked what Mui was doing there. The previous night, Lucy and Mui had a long talk, and Mui decided that she wanted to enroll in a magic academy. In that case, she would need a guardian, so starting today, she would be living with Beryl.